the situation in Ukraine, which is escalating with the launch of an ICBM, and this is a direct follow-on from a decision by the Biden administration to take the leash off of the ATACMS missiles that we sent to Ukraine. We want to talk a little bit about that, and our next guest, Noah Rothman of National Review, might have something to say about that. But Noah, first off, great to see you again. Thank you so much for being with us today. And I do want to talk a little bit about where we're going with Donald Trump's cabinet picks, because I think that you had something to say last week that really resonated with me, which was that if you're looking at foreign policy, this is a little different than what maybe we expected. This is not necessarily a isolationist isn't really the right word, but a non-interventionist set of personnel. Marco Rubio is a pretty muscular guy when it comes to foreign policy, and he's going to be leading that effort. And I think that even caused a little bit of momentary alarm is probably too strong a word, but momentary hesitation by some of the people, some of the populists that have been backing Donald Trump, is that this is sort of an interesting signal that he's sending foreign policy-wise with these choices.
Yeah, with the caveat being that everybody who's been trying to get right with Donald Trump and his movement has twisted themselves into rhetorical knots over Ukraine. Nobody really knows what Donald Trump's position on Ukraine is. They know what J.D. Vance's position on Ukraine is, but Donald Trump himself has been more than a little ambiguous, and his signals, or his picks signal that ambiguity. Marco Rubio and Congressman Walz do not have the same worldview as you said, as, for example, Tulsi Gabbard. When it comes to Ukraine, they're all sort of scrambling, and Congressman Walz and Marco Rubio have been sending signals that don't make a lot of sense. They are incongruous with their their coherent worldview. Tulsi Gabbard's worldview is 100% coherent. It does not shift with the political winds. She's what you would call a realist if you're being very, very, very charitable. But the others are projectionists, are, to use the layman's terms, hawk. They prefer an America that is confident on the world stage, has an extroverted presence on the world stage, aggressively defends its interests and defines its interests, which is not necessarily something that Tulsi Gabbard has often done. And there's going to be a lot of conflict in particular over Ukraine. I suspect very less tension when it comes to, for example, Iran. But let's just take Iran for one example. So I suspect that Donald Trump's cabinet will be very comfortable with supporting Israel as it degrades this constellation of terrorist groups that orbit around Tehran. But what about the Houthis? The Houthis are one of those terrorist groups, and they have mounted a challenge not necessarily to Israel, but to the United States. They're attacking maritime vessels in the Red Sea, in the Gulf of Aden, rising shipping costs, forcing those commercial interests to shadow Russian vessels and shadow Chinese vessels, because those are the only ones who will provide you cover in this environment. Joe Biden has not envisioned or pursued the kind of sustained kinetic action that would be necessary to reimpose stability in that region and to open up the Suez Canal, which is not something you can just abandon. There's no replacement for the Suez Canal. And this is sort of sustained action that I think the Trump administration 1.0 was leery of, and certainly Trump administration 2.0 hasn't really articulated the kind of cogent case for that sort of action that the American public will have to accept and have to ratify in order to pursue that course of action.
Yeah, let's stay with the Houthis for a second, because I have a thought on that. I mean, one of the problems I think that we created with this was pushing the Saudis to stop dealing with the Houthis, right? Because this was early in the Biden administration. We were threatening to suspend weapons, weapons sales to Saudi Arabia if they continued to fight the Houthis. It might just be as simple as, Donald Trump comes in and takes the Saudis off the leash and says, you guys go deal with these guys. And, we've got your back while you're doing that. I think maybe the Saudis would even perhaps want to be part of that solution. It's certainly it's on their border, it's in their backyard. And maybe the solution there is to just get the Saudis to take back up what they were doing while Trump was in office the last time.
Possibly. It's certainly always better for every player in the region, Israel, Saudi Arabia, what have you, if the United States takes that off the board for them. They would much prefer the United States do this work for them than they do it themselves. And the problem with a democracy, just to steelman the argument, is that the American public does have to be comfortable with the way in which these operations are executed. And the Saudis, while I don't agree with the criticisms that were leveled of KSA by Bernie Sanders and others, the Saudis didn't weren't conducting a sanitary military campaign. It was a pretty brutal military
Right.
campaign,
Yes.
as all military campaigns are, but this one had the brakes taken off entirely. And it's a sort of thing that erodes support for those operations rapidly, if not over a longer period of time. It's always preferable for the United States to do this sort of work because the United States does it well, does it surgically, has the capability to do it surgically, and removes from the equation the prospect of regional conflagration. You know, the Saudis want to avoid a direct conflict with Iran. Iran wants to provoke as much conflict as it can with Saudi Arabia. That's beneficial for its domestic politics, to say nothing of conflict with Israel. And there are a lot of variables there. Maybe you're right. Maybe if it's just reinvigorating our relationship with the Saudis. No, we don't know whether or not the Saudis want to engage in another prolonged military campaign on the Arabian Peninsula, but it's possible. I
True.
don't think that's a sustainable long-term solution. I think the sustainable long-term solution is a very aggressive, prolonged, sustained bombing campaign to degrade the Houthis' capabilities to the degree that they can't maintain this campaign. Now, maybe they get resupplied by Iran over a quick period of time, but that's long enough of a period of time for us to introduce the assets necessary in the region to restore deterrence. Deterrence is broken down, and there's only one way to restore it, and that is to raise the cost of aggressive action beyond the point at which an adversary is willing to absorb them.
Well, no, and that's what Israel's been doing, right, over the last year, is reestablishing its deterrence. And really, the solution that we're talking about in terms of the Houthis is the same solution we're talking about in terms of Hezbollah and Hamas, which is to deal with Iran. And
Yep.
I think you're right that this incoming administration is going to be very clear-eyed and very focused on Iran. It may not be their top priority. I think China's really going to be their top priority, and perhaps it should be. But I think Iran's going to be right up there, and that's one thing that I think that we can look at that will be a massive change from the last 4 years, which was sort of Iranophile rather than dealing with the threat that actually Iran is.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, it was, I think, just 3 months before the October 7th attacks that the last of these very obsequious overtures to Tehran to get it back into the JCPOA came from the Biden administration, which was, if I recall correctly, to simplify it, basically allowing Iraqi banks to launder foreign funds so that Tehran could access those funds. It was to pay for, electricity transfers, as I recall. But it was just an effort to launder foreign money and get it into Tehran's hands. That was the course of this administration for the first 3 years of it before October 7th. Now, to be fair, October 7th put the brakes on a lot of that. This administration had the scales fall from its eyes to a certain degree after October 7th. It was already past the point at which the damage had been done and too much time had been wasted to get back to that period. But I don't know if maximum pressure is the sort of thing that you can just restart. Maximum pressure was a great policy for its time. I think that time has largely passed. What we've seen over the course of the Biden administration is profoundly chilling. The ballistic missile attacks on Israel in October and April of this year demonstrated that Iran has the capacity to deliver a fissionable device above an Israeli city. It can penetrate Israeli air defenses. It can put a device over Tel Aviv. October 7th demonstrated that it has the will to exercise its genocidal campaign against Jews. I don't think we get to the point at which Israel can break out, Iran can break out, gets close to a breakout point, and we can accept that. The United States will have to act. And I don't think Israel can do it alone. We would have to support them logistically, over the air, over Iraq. And if we were smart, we would want to avoid a regional conflagration, and we would probably take that off the table entirely for Israel and do the work ourselves. But the point at which we can just simply twiddle our thumbs and say, well, this is a problem for another day, is rapidly dwindling. This will be a problem for this administration, and this administration will have to either neutralize Iranian nuclear capabilities, or it will have to envision a world in which Iran has a bomb and could deliver it to Israel, either directly or via proxies. And that's a far more dangerous world than what I'm willing to contemplate.